Namaskar and good morning. What a great treat it is to be with such a distinguished group of leaders this morning to discuss what we know is the most important and pressing issue of our time, and not to do it in an abstract way or just in a moral way, which is absolutely critical, but in a practical way where we have the opportunity to actually get down to the work that is before us. But I want to rewind the clock, and before I kind of go to my prepared remarks, just say, imagine that the year is 2001. In 2001, maybe when that picture was taken, I was a 30-year-old council member, newly elected in the city of Los Angeles, the second largest city in America. And Los Angeles, unlike most cities, owns its own Department of Water and Power. It's the largest municipal utility in the United States of America. And at the time, it was predominantly a utility run on coal. We own power plants and interest in power plants around the western United States and built thousands of kilometers of power lines to connect from those remote places to Los Angeles to feed what had been a dusty outpost, a city that's older than Washington, D.C., but for many years a small, dusty pueblo on the west coast of the United States, as in the 20th century it suddenly accelerated its growth, and it needed both water, and we won't talk about water here today, although that involves a lot of power in LA, and power in order to become that place that is now the manufacturing capital of America, aerospace capital, trade capital, obviously the creative capital, maybe not just of America, but of the world with Hollywood, and so much more prosperity. But in 2001, we looked at what was happening. On a day like this in Delhi, it brings back memories of growing up in Los Angeles, where the air was the most polluted air anywhere in America. Where like today, we were given warnings by our teachers, you cannot go outside and play, just as my daughter was given by her teachers today as I dropped her off at school. The cancer cluster that was on my street, both parents, my sister have all thankfully survived cancer, but 8 times between the two of them, and people who lived on our street right at the intersection of 2 main highways, who breathed that lead-filled toxic air. So when we talk about that moment where we find ourselves, not just of a world that is addressing climate change, but also of the daily health impacts of those vulnerable communities or just of urban centers that India faces, that the world faces today, it brings me back to that year where we suddenly looked at a utility and said, how can we continue to spew the pollution that is choking our air? And also, at that point, we saw the evidence, because it had been a good 10 years of empirical evidence that it was also heating the world and changing our planet. I'll come back to that in a second, but let me thank the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. As ambassador here, I've said the 4 Ps is my focus in this mission of peace, prosperity, planet, and people. Sometimes I add a 5th, which is our principles that I think unite United States and India at our best. The idea of 2 democracies, the diversity that we manage, the work that we do to make sure that pluralism and a better way of using technology stands in contrast to other visions around the world. But I want to thank Saurabh Kumar, and I want to thank the team at GEP for inviting me here today. And I'm so honored to join your chair and CEO, our former Cabinet Secretary, Mr. P.K. Sinha, to discuss this critical issue of not the what, but the how. The how. We know how interconnected we are. We know every climate speech, done no better than by Al Gore, begins with all of the visuals of what's happening every single day, of the climate impacts that we face. And as I used to say, to cut to the chase in Los Angeles, even in a place like Los Angeles, which is relatively wealthy, and we've been doing decades of this work, people die every single heat wave in our city because they don't have access to the air conditioning. They don't have access to the temperatures. They don't have access to the health needs that they need. We have children who drop out of school because they're waiting for buses and it's too hot, elderly that can't go shopping or go to their health appointments. We know that the human impact has never been greater. I took a class in 1990 in university because somebody said it would be the easiest science requirement at Columbia University where I was at, called Design and Maintenance of a Habitable Planet. It was taught by somebody named Wallace Broecker. And I went to that class, and he was the man who came up with the term global warming. So here I was, a young student, learning this, and he brought the first data from a group of scientific experts asked by the UN to look at what was happening to our planet. And when he showed that to me, it changed my life forever. I saw, and by the way, he's now passed away, but his predictions of how this earth would heat are uncannily accurate from way back then, more than 3 decades ago. And we know that this is not just about health. This is about our planet's peace. This is about our livelihoods. In fact, all 4 Ps of peace, prosperity, planet, and people are united by this conversation here today. Climate change makes our world less prosperous. Extreme weather creates incalculable damage to our infrastructure. Across the world, the access to food, to shelter, to healthcare and transportation are all impacted. In California, my home state, our estimates are in the last 2 years alone, more than $2.2 trillion came from damage in fires, floods, and more in that state alone. And if we don't have urgent action, we know about 100 million more people by 2030 will be pushed into poverty, even as we do heroic work to push people out of poverty in countries here, like in India, which is doing such an incredible job of that. I believe that the US-India relationship is the defining relationship of the century. I used to say it was private, but I've said it enough times I think I can say it publicly now, that when the president asked me to consider this post, he said, India is the most important country in the world for me. I know no American president has ever said that. Now, I thought it's Joe Biden, so he probably says that to the nominee for US ambassador to Liechtenstein, too. But he actually did mean it, because he repeated it to Prime Minister Modi in the Oval Office when they met during the recent historic state visit. You see, the relationship between the United States and India isn't just the United States plus India. It's India times the United States. It's an exponential relationship. Look at how we landed the best G20 ever in our history together. Of course, led by India, and thank you for your marvelous leadership. But India became a voice that allowed the voices of the Global South to be at the table. And the United States looked at the nimble diplomacy that could bring along the principles against war and the rule of law, but also include so much in what was ultimately a resolution without a single footnote or dissent. That's what happens when the United States and India get together. There's so many other examples, one which is not about climate, but I'll share with you. I was touring a few weeks ago a place where the United States medical researchers came up with a 4-strain vaccine for dengue fever. There's been vaccines attempted in the past, but only a single strain or 2 has been achieved. But we don't have the know-how or the ability to fund or to ramp up vaccines the way that India can, almost unparalleled in the world. So we shared it with 3 Indian companies, and one of them is in the 3rd round of its clinical trials, and within probably 2 or 3 years, you will see for the first time in human history a complete vaccine for dengue fever that can eliminate that not only here in India, but in Africa and around the world. It's US times India. That's what this relationship is about. We now are the 2nd and 3rd largest energy consumers. And despite our impressive progress, and I'll get back to the story of LA at the end, that we've made in renewable energy development, most of the energy that we use in both of our countries still come from carbon-emitting sources. So we also are the 2nd and 3rd largest carbon-emitting sources in the world. So the challenges we face are enormous. The urgency is here right now. We need to decarbonize every sector of our economy, and we have to think creatively, not just in the areas we each specialize in. If you're a specialist in wind or geothermal, don't just fixate on that, because it's going to be energy efficiency that's cheaper. And there's so much work to do in a country like India on energy efficiency of buildings. In Los Angeles, we used to say, while we were converting away from coal, in the meantime, what we could do to reduce demand and to add energy efficiency by paying people to weatherize their homes, to look at the ways we could maybe change what we're wearing. You know, why be in a suit with a tie? I know I'm wearing it here today, but as they've done in Japan and other places, turn up the thermostat, change what you're wearing, live a little bit more freely. We could bring down tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of demand and construction costs of a future renewable power plant that could be achieved basically in a matter of days or weeks, and we did that successfully. India now has set probably the most ambitious goal in the world, 500 gigawatts of non-fossil energy by 2030. And I'm so proud that we've gotten beyond the conversation of a couple years ago. A couple years ago, I think it was India and other voices from the so-called global south saying, okay, you all caused this problem, pay us to do it. And by the way, we're putting a marker up here, as Prime Minister Modi did, as of 2070 to be carbon neutral. And the West responded, wait a second, 2070, we're going to be there quicker. Yeah, sure, we polluted the world before and now we're developed, but you've got to do it quicker because we didn't know then what we know now and we're all interconnected, and neither side was wrong. But when I got here, the reason I think we've moved on from that is India is not only meeting, but it's surpassing the ambitious goals it set in terms of renewable generation. And that's been incredibly impressive. And the work where the West whines towards the global south of not going fast enough is changing because now we're seeing leadership that we can follow from countries like India in the global south, and in particular India, where this is happening at a record pace. So we know this starts at all levels. First of all, get rid of our caricatures about each other, join hands as partners, and figure out ways to look at the sectors that will have the greatest impact. One sector I'd like to propose to you that we were just talking about is the cities of India and the cities of America. Many of you know that when I was mayor of Los Angeles, I chaired something called C40, which is the 100 largest cities in the world's mayors. It's an extraordinary group. It's the only coming together that we have of all of those mayors in the world on any topic, but we focus mostly on climate, though it became this amazing kind of cadre of warriors during the COVID pandemic too, because like the global climate crisis, a health crisis unites us across borders. During that crisis, I remember it was my second Zoom meeting ever, where I'm like, what's Zoom? And suddenly, on this screen, we got about 80% of the mayors that were part of this, and think about all the time zones of the world. So we had folks from Japan, from Korea, from Australia, from India, from Europe, from Latin America. We were all on together. We had the mayor of Seoul talking about drive-through testing for the first time. Nobody knew what that even meant for taking tests for COVID. The mayor of Milan, when northern Italy was the peak in the world, saying this is how you need to get your hospital hallways ready so that fewer people die, and so on and so forth. And within days, we were implementing solutions to COVID, where national leaders took months to get reports and then negotiate between them. There's a nimbleness that happens at the urban level. But here, I think in India, cities are the prism of the challenges and the opportunities that India has. And I think we have lessons to learn from Indian cities and vice versa. And so in this coming year, we're going to be looking at convening a record number of American city leaders and Indian city leaders. And it's a little bit more confusing here because, of course, in India, city leaders don't exist in the same way they do in most other parts of the world. They're not empowered at the local level to tax, to regulate. And I would very humbly suggest, and I've talked to many Indian friends, that the time is ripe for India to figure out organically what works for the future of American cities so that we don't have, for instance, when we had flooding here just a couple months ago in Delhi, and people say, whose fault is it? Everybody can go, this. Because nobody ultimately is in charge of and elected to be in charge of with the power to run cities. So when it comes to traffic and pollution and emissions, when it comes to housing and green building, when it comes to the transportation networks that exist, most of the work that happens in a country actually happens within municipal boundaries. And so all the large goals that we have can only succeed if we do that with cities together. We also need more capital flows. And I'm committed to a relationship in which the United States brings aggressively more capital to India, whether it's the work we're doing together with the Rockefeller Foundation and the government of India and the government of the United States to fund clean buses and guarantees for clean buses so that when tenders are put forward, we can more rapidly put those out there and have that cleaner air in cities like Delhi and more sustainable ways of transporting people. Or whether it's looking at American pension funds, which in large don't invest directly in India, they invest through others, but convening the billions, if not trillions of dollars that we might be able to attract here around energy and infrastructure in this coming year here as well. The Inflation Reduction Act, I know, is a bit controversial here because it's seen by some as overly protectionist. But my goal with India is to look at what we can do to open up preferred geography between two countries. It's been my goal overall for trade, for defense, but also when it comes to climate. that we can look for opportunities for Indian companies to do well in the United States and vice versa for American companies to do well here, taking advantage of the work that's there. Partially as a result of this legislation, for instance, VSK Energy here in India announced an investment of up to $1.5 billion to develop a vertically integrated solar panel manufacturing operation in the United States. Whether it's green hydrogen electrolyzers, heat pumps, bioenergy, EV battery efficiencies, we have a record amount of money, the most in human history, in a single piece of legislation. And we need to figure out ways to share that not just in the United States, but with our preferred partners outside the United States as well. India's production-linked incentives, or PLIs, provide tax benefits right now to companies operating solar manufacturing, electrolyzers, as I mentioned, and together we're using those to bring American companies like First Solar, which received a $500 million investment from the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, whose favorite country in the world, by the way, is India. We're putting more money from that new corporation, that financing entity, into India than anywhere else. So investments need to flow more quickly both places. So cities, capital. Let's turn to, since we're doing C's, I'll add a third C, cars. It's actually transportation, because it's buses too, but let's say the three C's. We know that the cost of deploying clean energy technologies in India is still way too high. And I've had a ride on some of the smooth, clean buses that India is manufacturing. So not only is this historic partnership that we're putting forward through the Special Envoy on Climate, John Kerry, Rockefeller, Government of India, going to make history in terms of financing buses, but I'd like to see an India that's exporting those buses to the world. I've been that mayor who has really only two choices. Choice of maybe an American company, we're proud of those and want to see those expand, or a company from a place that enjoys a lot of subsidies to the north of you and where we need to diversify together away from. If India was in those bids, I guarantee you Indian companies would do incredibly well in the United States. So as we build up the industrial needs and capacity here to meet the transportation networks, think too about what that can do for companies, Indian companies, selling in the United States as well, creating jobs in my country, and looking at ways forward. In June 23, when Prime Minister Modi came, and my time is up past 7 minutes, so I'm going to wind this up real quick. It's always good to look at the clock. They reaffirmed as a central pillar of what we are doing together as countries as climate. In fact, the Prime Minister, in the bilateral that happened before the G20 meeting here, brought up with our President also climate in the context of the Quad and in the context of global warming in general, and the work we could do together in third countries to help finance and bring technology and to make sure that there were answers to the most pressing challenges. So let me, since we're out of time, let me kind of close where I started. When I left being mayor last December, we were on the way by the end of this decade to be at a utility that was 1% renewable in 2001 when I started. 1% renewables. The end of this decade, 2030, we will be a utility providing power to Hollywood, to Tinseltown, to Los Angeles, with 97% carbon-free energy, reliably, cheaply, and sustainably. We've brought down the amount of energy that the average Angelino uses, while we've boosted the number of jobs that come from green energy and sustainable jobs. And by the end of 2035, 100%, some of you out there know that last 3% can be tricky, we'll be 100% carbon-free. It's not a short journey, 24 years, but I'm here as testament that you can do it. And I know India will do it in less than 24 years. That 2070 was an initial goal, but as you bring that goal down, know that we are your partners to co-write that history, to look back and to say, when I come back as a former ambassador and walk through the streets of Delhi in the middle of Diwali, and I look at the air quality index and it's hovering at 73, that our work indeed is done. Because it's not about billions of dollars, it's not about megawatts of energy. It's about our lungs, it's about our children, it's about our future, it's about our planet, it's about our people. And we're honored to be your co-partners in achieving that future together. Thank you. Thank you so much.